reacting to a Sukuna fan's hot takes. So this should be really fun, but spoilers beware. And shout out to AKM for providing the takes today. So the first thing he says is both Gojo and Sukuna needed to be buffed by the plot in order to counter each other, referring to Gojo's prison realm experience and Sukuna using Mahoraga. And I think this is fair enough. Like, it might be kind of oversimplifying things, but yeah, both of them kind of brought things to the fight that they really needed in order to get the job done. Now, without each of those things, what would have happened? And I think that's a pretty good debate you can have. But like I've always said, I think they're both roughly equal, and we'll never know what happens. No prison realm, no Mahoraga, right? But I don't think either of them like needed those things to beat each other, but obviously both things played a massive role in their fight. Next, Sukuna and Shibuya would have probably won against Gojo had Gojo not been sealed and had they faced off against each other. So in a way, Gege protected Gojo first, only to kill him off later on. And I disagree with this one. I'm assuming this stems largely from the fact that you must think Gojo has to have that prison realm experience. And maybe he does in terms of the clash we ultimately saw, right? But in Shibuya, Sukuna was only at 15 fingers. And it's hard to quantify how that affects his strength and how it might affect things like domain refinement, right? We don't know. But given how close the fight was at 20 fingers, I don't think there's any way that Sukuna beats Gojo at only 15. Next, Sukuna was confident in winning against Gojo at 20 fingers of power, even back in the second episode, before he even knew about Mahoraga. And I would agree with this. I don't think Sukuna was ever scared of anyone he fought in his entire life, and certainly not Gojo, certainly not at that point in the story where he really didn't know too much about him. Yes, they had their little 10-second duel, so he had some grasp of his strength, but Sukuna's just not scared, you know what I mean? He's never faced a true challenge in his life. He wasn't just going to assume that this Gojo guy had him beat. Next, Sukuna would have won the Shinjuku raid if not for Yuji's soul slashes. If he was in his original body, it would have been game over. Uraume, is that you? But no, I completely agree. We know that that was a huge factor, right? Also being, weakened by Gojo, obviously. But on top of that, if not for the soul slashes, if not for the black flashes that were constantly depowering Sukuna by weakening that connection between him and Megami, I agree, he would have won. And then this next one is kind of along the same lines. He says, Sukuna was slightly, if not very, nerfed in the Shinjuku raid, post-Gojo fight, because even Yuji hits harder black flashes than Sukuna. So I would agree that he was nerfed, if by nerfed you mean weakened, from the Gojo fight. But if you mean like Gege just literally nerfed him to make him weaker in order to beat him beyond things that happened in the plot, then I would disagree. Yes, I see what you're saying, Yuji's black flashes seemed to do more than Sukuna's, because we know he black flashed Todo and Maki, and both of them, continued to fight afterwards. But I think that was a result of how much weaker he was post-Gojo fight, and not the result of Gege just nerfing him out of nowhere for plot. Then next up, the Mahoraga scream in the manga was not out of desperation or a save me Mahoraga moment like Gojo fans claim, but instead a rageful scream from Sukuna as Mahoraga had made a mistake by choosing to attack Gojo's blue, which it had adapted to, and thus caused a massive disadvantage, instead of going for the red. Sukuna could have gone for blue, that way utilizing its pull. And I'll give you this one somewhat. Obviously, this moment was memed to hell and back with him saying, save me, Mahoraga! But I do think that this is more than just being angry. Because right before this, there was the line about he had felt fear for the first time in a century. So was he angry? Sure. But I do think that's underselling it a little bit. It's not this extreme, but I do think there's a little bit in there. Then next up, the Gojo versus Sukuna fight was only a 2v1, as Gojo himself states that Agito doesn't belong there and is a one-trick pony. Agito was basically a coughing baby fighting amongst hydrogen bombs. And I think this one is just semantics at the end of the day. I get what you're saying. Agito wasn't a threat. Gojo made short work of them. But at the end of the day, it was 3v1. In the same way that you could call the Shinjuku raid 20v1 against Sukuna, well, was it really 0v1? Because none of them are actual threats to him. It was only this insane combination of things that allowed them to beat him. It's where do we draw the line? So sure, like Agito was not a threat to Gojo, and that's fair, but it was a 3v1. All right, for this next one, I'm going to read the whole thing and then respond to it. He says, I think it's pretty underrated that Sukuna, after being hit with 0.01 seconds of Unlimited Void, was able to fight and maintain his domain for 2 minutes and 40 seconds, and then, once he got hit by Unlimited Void again, we don't know the time, but definitely more than 0.01 seconds, he was able to summon Mahoraga in the middle of getting hit by Unlimited Void, and not only that, he was able to fight Gojo within seconds. Probably less than a second, as the moment the domain is destroyed, Sukuna is back on the battlefield. He took some brain damage, but this entire thing is a huge feat. So I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding here, because you are referencing twice that Sukuna gets hit with Unlimited Void, but from my recollection, it was only the one time. This time. Well, this maybe isn't the photo I chose. This is Sukuna like reacting to the damage of Unlimited Void, but he only gets hit by Unlimited Void once, and it's the time where Gojo opens the domain slightly faster because Sukuna is still healing from his previous wound, right? And so that was like the 0.1 second or whatever it was. And then here there's a reference of it hadn't even been 10 seconds, which I know I remember now why I used this panel. I remember some people were confused by this, thinking that this meant Sukuna took like not even 10 seconds of Unlimited Void, but I think they were saying that this is the amount of time it has been since he was hit by Unlimited Void. So this was the only time, and he did take brain damage, and the fact that he did continue on fighting, period, after that is impressive. So I will give you that. But there was no second time where he took a long amount of Unlimited Void. Based upon the context of what you were saying about Mahoraga, I think you're referring to this moment here, but Sukuna wasn't hit by Unlimited Void here. He was just hit by these hands. This was the moment Gojo Black flashed him after surprising him with that red attack. And it's here, when he gets knocked unconscious for a bit, that Mahoraga comes out and protects him and saves him. But then, like you mentioned, he is very quickly on the battlefield once more. So still impressive, sure, but it's not a feat akin to having taken multiple seconds of Unlimited Void across 2 different exposures, right? It was still just that one time he took a little bit of Unlimited Void. And then Megami obviously was affected by Unlimited Void multiple times, but I'm pretty sure that's not what you were referring to. Then finally, AKM says, Sukuna took a much riskier but guaranteed way to win over Gojo instead of an easier way. Basically, he chose to keep a counter to Unlimited Void just in case, instead of maximizing his domain amplification uptime and domain output in order to win strictly via domain clashes. And there's more. Y'all can pause to read if you'd like. I'm not going to go too in-depth here because I have a lot of videos talking about Gojo and Sukuna and the domain matchup and all that jazz. But what I'll say is I don't think it's fair to classify this as necessarily a riskier but guaranteed way. Obviously, there were risks involved in his plan because he did want to learn from Mahoraga and upgrade his arsenal. I will give you that. But I don't think it's fair to say that if he hadn't have done that, there was a less risky way for him to just win. Sure, he could have used domain amplification way more, but that's not like... Sure, it might have affected the hand-to-hand somewhat, and we really can't quantify that. Like, we don't know what that version of the fight would have looked like, right? But I really don't think that's moving the needle that much. Like, Gojo is really good at hand-to-hand, and sure, domain amp coming in makes each punch more threatening than it would otherwise be, because it can't get to him at all, right? So that's something, but I really don't think it's that much. And domain output, I don't think Sukuna... Now, I'm not saying that there weren't times when the output fluctuated for various reasons, but I don't think Sukuna was legitimately holding back output that he could have used to beat Gojo and he was choosing not to. AKM references the fact that, you know, when a smaller domain, you could increase the output. And I do think that is something that is doable in certain situations, but I don't think that was happening in the Gojo fight. I think the better way to think about that binding vow, if you will, is that maybe you could super increase the size of your domain in return for lessened output. But I don't think it's always going to be the smaller you make it, it always is increasing output. Like, I think there is a max limit to the output that was used in their domain clashes. So could he have won without the 10 Shadows, without Mahoraga? Yes. But I don't think he was like holding back to an extreme degree to do the Mahoraga stuff. It's obviously a lot more nuanced than that 20-second response implies, but like I said, I've got other videos where that's the entire subject of discussion, so check those out if you guys are interested. But that's going to do it for this one, y'all. So as always, thank you for watching.